Today we're going to talk a bit about descent, rebirth, and ascension. So this is a part of the heroine's journey, which we'll look at a little bit. And mostly I'm going to focus on descent with you all. I think that there is a lot of emphasis on the beauty and magic of rebirth. And there's a lot of focus in our society and culture in ascension and the light and all of that stuff. But what I'd love to see more of, and what I love personally, is descending into our own inner depths and the darkness. So put up a little picture here of the cycle of the heroine's journey and just chat about that briefly. So the heroine's journey often starts with a separation from the feminine, and then an identification with the masculine and gathering allies. So most of us have had to separate from the feminine. I'd say all of us living in this patriarchal society have had to separate from the feminine and disown our inner feminine and align with the masculine and gather up resources and allies. And then next, there's this road of trials, meeting ogres and dragons, so obstacles and things coming up. And then finding the boon of success, which kind of brings us, that boon brings up, gives us a bit of energy. And then awakening to feelings of spiritual aridity and death. So this like drying out and things start to get a bit bleak. And then we have the initiation and descent to the goddess. So this is the part that we're going to be looking at mostly in this call. And then through that, there is an urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine, and then healing the mother and daughter split. So often when we've separated from the feminine and rejected the feminine, this also involves rejecting parts of our mother. And this can be very important work to look at the ways in which we have rejected or disowned parts of our mother and therefore disowned parts of ourselves. And then healing the wounded masculine, and then an integration of masculine and feminine. So that's the heroine's journey. And like I said, we're going to be chatting about descent because often in our society, we abort the process of descent. We stop descent and our society says it's not okay, it doesn't look good, it's not comfortable, we don't understand it, it's crazy, it's, she's depressed or whatever it may be. So we'll look at descension and how we can honor it. So first I'll talk about within our cycles how we can honor descension. So in our cycles, for any of us bleeding, or if you're not bleeding currently, you can work with the cycle of the moon. It's the phase before you bleed. So the luteal phase is this beginning of the descension. And so working with this time as a conscious time of descending and unearthing and beginning to die and becoming aware of what is dying in us, what is calling and yearning to be let go of and shifted in us, and really allowing and embodying that descent. And then there can also be other times outside of the cycle and kind of a larger lifespan cycle of descent. So it may be that we're in a time of descent for a couple of months or a couple of years, and that within that cycle there are other cycles of rebirth and ascension still going on, perhaps, or there could just be a big overall descent. And in order to the idea with the heroine's journey is that we just continue going on this journey. And often it kind of is happening anyway, but if we can become conscious of it, then we can consciously engage with it and become aware of where we're avoiding things on our journey and how we can really be supported. So like in gathering allies, for example, it may be that in your life there have already been allies around you, but if we're conscious of it, we can consciously call on our allies, we can call on our heart and those things. So I'm going to read you a few snippets from The Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch, which is an excellent book for this kind of work. When a woman decides not to play by patriarchal rules anymore, she has no guidelines telling her how to act or how to feel. When she no longer wants to perpetuate archaic forms, life becomes exciting and terrifying. Change is frightening, but where there's fear, there's power. If we can learn to feel our fear without letting it stop us, fear can become an ally. A sign to tell us that something we have encountered can be transformed. Often our true strength is not in the things that represent what is familiar, comfortable, or positive, but in our fear and in our resistance to change. An initiation process has begun. During this part of the journey, the woman begins her descent. It may involve a seemingly endless period of wandering, grief and rage, of dethroning kings, of looking for the lost pieces of herself and meeting the dark feminine. It may take weeks, months, or years. For many, it may involve a time of voluntary isolation, a period of darkness and silence, and of learning the art of deep listening once again to self, of being instead of doing. The outer world may see this as a depression and a period of stasis. Family, friends, and work associates implore our heroine to get on with it. This period is often filled with dreams of dismemberment and death, of shadow sisters and intruders, of journeys across deserts and rivers, of ancient goddess symbols and sacred animals. There is a desire to spend more time in nature, being nurtured by the earth, and an increasing awareness of seasonal changes and the rhythms of the moon. For many women, the time of menstruation becomes an important occasion to honor womanhood, blood, the cleansing, and renewal of the body and soul. The descent cannot be hurried because it is a sacred journey. One not only of reclaiming the lost parts of oneself, but also of rediscovering the lost soul of culture, what many women today view as reclaiming the goddess. I just want to invite you to take a deep breath in and to reflect on where in your life you feel you've been called to descend. What are the moments and times that were a dissension for you, and what happened in those times? So often when we reflect, I've heard countless stories of women who have been in dissension and then a healthcare provider interrupted. And the dissension then took years when it maybe could have taken months. And so I invite you to reflect in your own life on this dissension, and where in your life you might be aborting your own process of dissension, and what that looks like for you. The descent is characterized as a journey to the underworld. The dark night of the soul, the belly of the whale, the meeting of the dark goddess, or simply as depression. It is usually precipitated by a life-changing loss. Experiencing the death of one's child, parent, or spouse with whom one's life and identity has been closely intertwined may mark the beginning of the journey to the underworld. Women often make their descent when a particular role, such as daughterhood, motherhood, lover, or spouse, comes to an end. A life-threatening illness or accident, the loss of self-confidence or livelihood, a geographical move, the inability to finish a degree, a confrontation with the grasp of an addiction, or a broken heart can open the space for dismemberment and descent. Now I just want to pause here because I think that the crisis that's happening right now with COVID-19, as I record this, in that crisis, there is an opening, an opportunity for dismemberment, death, and descent. And although that can feel terrifying, and often we view death as something to avoid, there is so much magic in the darkness and magic in the descent. If we can be with it, if we can continue and not abort the process. And if we can begin to trust our own descent and journey and process, which we can do by regularly allowing and tapping into our descent with our bleed, so that luteal phase of the cycle, it's like a mini opportunity to, it may not be like a full-blown descent and total loss of self, but it's kind of like a mini, and depending on what's going on, it may be really huge, but it's an opportunity to begin to honor and explore descent, so that when it happens in ways of, you know, like when we become a mother, for example, that's a huge loss of how things were before, right? So often there's a descent for many women around that. And instead we're told, oh, you know, this is the happiest time of your life, and yay, you're new, fresh, tiny baby, or whatever. And so it may be that there's a lot of grief around all the times where you weren't able to honor descent, whether it be because of outside forces or because internally you didn't know or value or feel safe in descending. So she continues to say, this journey into the underworld is filled with confusion and grief, alienation and disillusion, rage and despair. A woman may feel naked and exposed, dry and brittle, or raw and turned inside out. I felt this way while fighting advanced cervical dysplasia during the dissolution of my marriage and when I lost confidence in myself as an artist. Each time I had to face truths about myself and my world that I wished not to see. And each time I was chastened and cleansed by the fires of transformation. I invite you to just take a deep breath. And I want to emphasize these words. Each time I had to face truths about myself and my world that I wished not to see. So we'll explore this more when we look at shadow work. But I want to invite in that we often can't see these things because we really don't want to, because it's uncomfortable to accept and to be with. And so like in that space before you bleed and honoring that time, really opening to, what is it that I need to see right now? What is it that I'm avoiding looking at? What is hidden from me in my shadow? And breathing into your womb space and asking it questions, asking it, what is it that I'm avoiding looking at right now? What is it that I cannot see? What is it that I don't want to see, right? And then having and holding space for yourself, and that can mean asking for support from someone else to help hold the space for you, to explore that thing, right? Or the parts of yourself that you have pushed away. And our mothers are a big one with this. They're our first representation of the feminine. And so the things that we have rejected about our mother, we've often rejected about ourselves and are in our shadow. And reclaiming that doesn't mean, and healing those wounds doesn't necessarily mean healing that with your mother, but it does then show up in yourself when we can reclaim and heal the split from our mothers. So she then goes on to say, in the underworld, there is no sense of time. Time is endless, and you cannot rush your stay. There is no morning, day, or night. It is densely dark and unforgiving. This all-pervasive blackness is moist, cold, and bone-chilling. There are no easy answers in the underworld. There is no quick way out. Silence pervades when the wailing ceases. One is naked and walks on the bones of the dead. To the outside world, a woman who has begun her descent is preoccupied, sad, and inaccessible. Her tears often have no name, but they are ever present, whether she cries or not. She cannot be comforted. She feels abandoned. She forgets things. She chooses not to see friends. She curls up in a ball on the couch or refuses to come out of her room. She digs into the earth or walks in the woods. The mud and the trees become her companions. She enters a period of voluntary isolation, seen by her family and friends as a loss of her senses. wanted to highlight here a bit of a difference in the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, and just say that we all have an inner feminine and an inner masculine, and so there is use still in healing our masculine, and that is part of the heroine's journey, and there is use in, you know, some of the patriarchal stuff that we have going on, but the idea is about finding our own center and who we are without all of this conditioning and stuff that's been piled on top of us. So a note on that from the heroine's journey is women find their way back to themselves not by moving up and out into the light like men, but by moving down into the depths of the ground of their being. And so ways that we can do this are by connecting with the earth and moving down, covering ourselves in the earth and in the leaves, you know, being naked on the earth, and submerging in water and feeling what it feels like to go down in our body. A woman moves down into the depths to reclaim the parts of herself that split off when she rejected the mother and shattered the mirror of the feminine. To make this journey, a woman puts aside her fascination with the intellect and games of the cultural mind and acquaints herself, perhaps for the first time, with her body, her emotions, her sexuality, her intuition, her images, her values, and her mind. This is where she finds the depths. I write with trepidation about the descent because I have great respect for the process and do not want to trivialize it. It is a sacred journey. In our culture, however, it is usually categorized as a depression, which must be medicated and eliminated as quickly as possible. No one likes to be around someone who is depressed. If we choose, however, to honor the descent as sacred and as a necessary aspect of the quest to fully know ourselves, fewer women would lose their way in depression, alcohol, abusive relationships, or drugs. They could experience their feelings without shame, reveal their pain without apathy. When a woman makes her descent, she may feel stripped bare, dismembered, or devoured by rage. She experiences a loss of identity, a falling away of the perimeters of a known role, and the fear that accompanies loss. She may feel dried up, raw, and devoid of sexuality, or experiencing the gut-wrenching pain of being turned inside out. And she may spend a long time there in the dark, waiting while life goes on up above. Every time a woman makes the descent, she fears the dark goddess and what this part of herself will do to her. The descent is a compulsion. We will all try to avoid it, but at some point in our lives, we journey to the depths. It is not a glamorous journey, but it invariably strengthens a woman and clarifies her sense of self. Coming to terms with dissension and reflecting on times in my life where I have been descending and wasn't aware of it or didn't know how to honor and trust in dissension has been a massive part of my healing journey. And it's given me a lot of space to explore and to really trust in the deep, uncomfortable, heavy, painful, confusing, overwhelming, all-devouring things that come up for me. And so really what I want to invite you into is this exploration of what it means to you to allow parts of yourself to die and descend, and how can you honor them? How can you honor these parts of yourself that you don't even know yet? How can you begin to start the process of trusting these parts that we don't know, and trusting that if they do devour and dismember us, that there's something underneath, that there is a gift in there for you. So one of the things I've learned through this process is that there are gifts in the darkness. Like I cannot emphasize enough how much magic is in there for each of us. And I know for me, it's taken this realization that in order for me to continue doing the work that I feel called to do, I need to keep descending. So it's easy to get stuck in this time of ascension and feeling like, oh yeah, things are up and I feel like I know who I am, and yeah, I'm doing these things, and look, it's great, and yeah, wow, cool. And it's also really applauded by society. You know, society's like, yes, look at that woman, she's doing the things. And sometimes, you know, depending on what you're doing, society may still say no, you know, but by and large, people think of, you know, ascension is that time of success and confidence and feeling alive and in yourself and all that. And people like that. They really like to see that. And people don't like to see, you know, like she talks about the depressed woman, the woman who is devoured by her rage, or who is crying all the time, even if there are no tears, you know. So recognizing for myself that in order to get to the ascension and in order to get the rebirth, I need to descend. And that changing in my relationship with the descent, you know, has changed things drastically for my understandings of my own depression and anxiety and things like that. I don't even use those words to describe myself at all any longer. And also has given me more language to be able to talk to other people, and to talk to, like, my partner and other people in my life about dissension and what happens for me when I enter the darkness. So yeah, please let me know any questions that come up, any reflections that you have, and I would love to hear about times in your life where there has been dissension, and what has come up, and how you've maybe aborted the process, or how you maybe are in dissension right now, and what's coming up with you and for you through that.